reducing youth substance use is important in youth. Reducing youth substance use in youth is important. Everyone here, we are all here to reduce youth substance use. All of us. You may be thinking, but really, it's the past, right? But no, you are here because you think it's important to reduce youth substance use. Because there'd be no season pass without our business partners. And they think that it's a priority, our purpose, to reduce substance use in young people. Stratton Mountain, Riley Rink, Viking Nordic Center, over the years of this program, have donated more than $1.5 million in season passes. $1.5 million, that means that they think that it is very important to reduce youth substance use. So our business partners are here at the table to do that. And then over the course of our program, there's been over 3,000 families who recognize that young people need support in their decision to be substance-free. They recognize that substance use prevention education is needed for young people to stand by their decision to be substance-free. And they recognize that a healthy lifetime activity like skiing, riding, or skating can help to have young people refuse to use. So families are here to help reduce substance use in young people. And of course, our refuse to use representatives recognize that our young people need an extra boost of education on substance use. They need an extra adult prodding and encouraging them about it. So these volunteers spend over 40 hours each season. Our refuse to use representatives are here to reduce substance use in youth. So there's some professionals here too, and they spend a lot of hours learning best practices and looking at data around substance use. And these are the teachers and the medical staff and law enforcement, the district attorney, and of course the collaborative staff and board, and it's a part of our jobs. But we are here to reduce substance use in young people. And last, and seriously not least, are the young people here. So you're here to reduce substance use in youth too, for yourselves and for your peers. And of course you're saying, yeah, but it's about the past. So sure, we all have incentives in our lives. I try really hard at my job, I work really hard, I hope I do a good job because my incentive is my paycheck, and I feel a little good about it too. I ride my bike, and the incentive is I get to have a piece of pie at the end of the day. Everybody's got their incentives. So your behavior is to be substance-free, and the incentive is the pass. We get that. It's more fun to hit the mountain with friends, so hopefully you're encouraging your friend to adhere to their pledge, and they're encouraging you to adhere to your pledge. And it all works out for all of us, but you are here to reduce substance use also. So fine, sometimes you're here for the past, but we're all here to reduce substance use. And it's important to recognize how many in our community do support reducing substance use, because sometimes it feels like a really lonely task. A lonely task for parents. It can feel really lonely for young people who are trying to refuse to use. It can feel really lonely for everybody here. So look around you again, because this is your team. This is your people. These are the people who are all in it together trying to reduce youth substance use. So thank you for making that commitment. And now's the time to give yourselves a good round of applause for doing it. And I hope that you can rely on each other to make sure that everybody's successful in this endeavor. So I wanted to also tell you that the collaborative is really committed to making sure that the Refuse to Use program is the best program possible for all of the young people, all of the families. And we've been doing it on a shoestring for a really long time. And we applied for a grant last year to improve our process and to improve our program through the Holt Foundation, and thankfully we got that grant. Yay! So we have some money through the Holt Foundation, which is a great foundation. Check them out. And our process for this grant for the next 3 years is going to be to improve the curriculum and the programs put forth for the Refuse to Use program, increase participation, and improve the profile of the refuse to use program in the community. So maybe we can get more partners on board and more incentives and more backing for it. So look for those changes. If you feel like you've got some really valuable input for us, drop us a line. We are ready and waiting to receive it and to act on it through this grant. So now on to our keynote speaker. And Dr. Jennifer Michaels has come today to talk to us, and she is an assistant professor and medical director. Dr. Michaels of the University of Massachusetts Medical School, and is the medical director of the Brien Center, Berkshire County's largest community mental health provider. Dr. Michaels is a dual board certified in adult and addiction psychiatry. She is a national mentor for the Physicians Clinical Support System and a substance abuse and mental health administration funded program providing training and education to physicians treating people with addictions. Dr. Michaels is a frequent guest on public radio, WAMC, and is committed to community education topics related to mental health. So I'm looking forward to listening to Dr. Michaels, everybody.
So first, I'd like to thank the Collaborative for inviting me to speak. I live in the Berkshires, about an hour and a half away, and this is a topic I'm very passionate about. Yes, I'm a psychiatrist. I treat people who have substance use disorders, and I'm also a mom to 2 boys. And so on many levels, this is a topic that is really important to me. And then additionally, we have some changes in our society. You know, we have changes in how our society is thinking about marijuana. In Massachusetts, it's now legal for medical use and also recreational use. And I think in Vermont, you soon will have a similar profile. You already have medical marijuana, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a good time to think about marijuana, and we need to learn about marijuana, and we need to learn about talking about marijuana with our family, especially our kids. So what is our responsibility in this evolving society? You know, in my experience, some people are really good at saying, well, it's the teachers, or it's the parents, or it's the health class, but it's really all of us. You know, we're all in it together, and I like to think that we're so much stronger because we are all in it together. And our responsibility is to learn the facts, to gather information, because there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of, I hate to say, like fake news and, you know, not fake news, but we need to learn the facts, and I hope to present the facts so that you can make good decisions about how your family wants to live and what you hope and dream for your young people. Some people are saying, well, why does legalization matter at all? It's just something that happened. Well, it does matter for a few reasons. First, it changes our ideas or our perception of marijuana. You know, if something's legal, that means it's safe. It's not a problem anymore. Also, when it's legal, it will be much more available. You know, right now where I live, people are deciding on the neighborhoods and the street blocks and the towns where it will be available for purchase. So it changes our perception. The other thing is the marijuana we're talking about now in 2017 is vastly different than the marijuana about 50 years ago. And so we'll jump into that topic so that you can make smart decisions and also have that factual information before making any other decisions. Finally, and I think this is most important, a young person's brain is not an adult brain. It's a very different brain. It's under construction. It's like a massive construction site. Now, when I was in medical school, this is what they told us. Well, you have a baby, and then that baby grows their brain and wires their brain, and by the time they're 10 or 11, they have a little adult brain. It's not going to change. You're not going to damage it. You're not going to grow it. That was totally wrong, because with imaging, CAT scans, MRIs, we now know that a young person's brain is not fully developed until they're actually in their 20s, when they're 25 or so. So before you fully develop your brain, you're creating habits and wiring and connections, loops of behavior and fast tracks that will serve you or hurt you for life. And so we really need to think about the habits we're creating. So I mentioned before that the marijuana in the 60s is not the marijuana now. This is an example of potency. Potency, I mean how much of THC, which is also named tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the active, get high, psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. How much is actually in marijuana that people buy? Well, in the 60s to 70s, 1% of marijuana being used was actually THC, that stuff that got you high. In this time, 2017, it's over 15% THC, meaning, if you take one puff now of something with marijuana, it's like you took 15 from, the 50 or 60 years ago. So it's really potent. It's a very different marijuana than most people think of. This is a slide just to go back to that idea of thinking that something's risky or thinking that something's safe. So perceived risk. That means if I think something's really risky, the yellow line, if I think something's really risky, the yellow line goes up, we see that past year use goes down. There's an inverse relationship. The more I think something's safe, the more likely, of course, I'm going to give it a try. And there is a thought that with legalization and having stores on the corner for marijuana, it's going to be perceived as really safe, with the expectation that use may go up. So we got to watch this and we have to be on top of it. That's my thought. The other thing I want to talk about is, as a mom of 2 boys, who will come home and say, well, everyone's doing it. Everyone's smoking, everyone's drinking, I'm the only one not having sex. Has anyone ever heard that from their kids? Like, everyone's doing it. There are a few hands going up, but I certainly heard that. But the reality is very different. This is from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and it looks at trends, okay? It is a little hard to see, I apologize. But what we see is that over the last 20 years or so, alcohol use in high schoolers has trended down, meaning about 50% of seniors drank regularly in 1993, and now it's down to about 40%. So we're making really good progress, and it's not just us. Kids are making really good decisions, smart decisions for alcohol. Okay, so lots of good is happening. Same thing when we look at tobacco. Okay, 1993, about a third of kids smoked tobacco regularly. It's way down, the lowest it's actually ever been. About 15% of young people are making the decision to smoke tobacco. So we're making a lot of great gains, and the other thing is not everybody's doing it. All right, that's just not true. Let's look at marijuana. So you can see that's the one area of concern. All right, first of all, good news, not everyone's smoking marijuana. A minority of people are doing that. But in the last few years, we're seeing an uptick. And I don't know that we can say it's definitely because of legalization or it's because of these stores or we don't know. But we are seeing an increase in marijuana use, especially in the seniors. And so that's something to be aware of, and that's why this meeting today is so good, so you'll have the vital information to have the discussions. So let's start, marijuana 101. What is marijuana? Any thoughts? I have my list to tell you, but, well, it's a plant. It's a natural plant. It grows naturally. You can cultivate it. And by cultivation, you know how you can do certain things to add minerals or sunlight to grow a crop better. You can grow a type of marijuana to get the maximum amount of THC, the thing that gets you high, that psychoactive chemical. But it also has other chemicals in it, 480 other compounds. And we really don't know what most of them do. So when you choose to use marijuana, if you do, you're also getting those other compounds. Some of them may be therapeutic, like cannabidiol is one that we are looking at as maybe a medicine to help people, but there are many others that we have no clue what they are. So my view is that this marijuana we don't know about, we're not quite ready for prime time. Finally, very important, it's easy to create molecules that look like marijuana, but they're not marijuana. They look like THC, but they're not THC, and they're sold as synthetic marijuana or synthetic cannabinoids. And people have run into a lot of problems because we don't know much about those molecules. And this is getting into the understanding of like how much we really don't know and how much we have to learn. Now, I mentioned before that marijuana, unless it's synthetic, comes from a plant, okay? It's natural. And that's a reason a lot of people will say, it's natural, what's the big deal? Like, it's natural, it's a plant, I should be able to use it. My thought is a little different because I treat people who have addictions, substance use disorders. I see that trajectory of young people starting out with recreational use, getting addicted. And I say to them, you know what, marijuana is natural, but so are a lot of other things. Like if you look at this slide, which I hoped it would look better, the upper left-hand corner, totally natural, it's a plant. Anyone know what that is? Yes. The upper left? You're right, we'll go to the upper right. Opium, the upper right is totally natural, it's a beautiful flower, that's where we get opium. So if you're using opium, it's totally natural, except what we do is we cultivate it to maximize the amount of opiate. We tweak the molecule to make things like oxycodone. We then go on to make new molecules that are slightly related, things like fentanyl. And so all chemicals that we use, for the most part, started out with a natural substance that we then took advantage of. Upper left now, anyone know what that is? The coca plant, that's where cocaine comes from. A lot of people think cocaine is not natural. It's actually really easy to grow. If you go to Peru, they even use it in teas. But we cultivate it and then we make it a very intense elixir, and this is cocaine. Bottom left, that's the marijuana. Okay, that's what it looks like. Bottom right, anyone know? This is usually the toughest one. Any guess what that natural substance is that makes something that intoxicates us? Yeast. Yay, you guys are the first ones who got yeast. I've never presented and gotten yeast. So alcohol is actually yeast poop, okay? So if you're drinking yeast poop. You can't get much more natural than poop, okay? So just to let you know, all substances, for the most part, there are a few little exceptions, we don't have time to go into it, are totally natural, or they're tweaks of a natural molecule. So the natural stuff, I just think, yeah, so what? But the other thing is, marijuana is more than that, because it's now a business. It's a business. And some of you may remember for tobacco, there were the people who made Joe Camel were sued because they almost looked like playthings. The Joe Camel advertisement for cigarettes looked like, like a friendly, fuzzy guy, Camel, and it was appealing to very young people. We're doing the same thing now with marijuana. So these are all products of marijuana. So there's a Kit Kat over there, that's marijuana. There are lollipops for marijuana, the cookies, which I adore. Those are marijuana cookies, and then there are nice looking drinks. So they're produced in a way that are appealing not for adults, but actually young people. And this feels like the worst offender. Grape Ape and Pop-Tarts. All right, those are marijuana containing substances. That's what and baked fish, okay? Baked fish. All right. And there's a problem with that, and you probably have heard some of the stories, which is that if you buy one of those amazingly good-looking cookies, right, it will say eat 1/4 of the cookie. That's like the standard dose. All right. Now, if you're like me, I've never in my life had 1/4 of a cookie. Okay. So that's a problem. But even if I followed the rules and I took 1/4 and I consumed it and I weigh it, I'm like, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. What are you going to do? I'm going to eat the other 1/4. Nothing's happening. Nothing. Okay. By the end, I've eaten the whole cookie because nothing happened. Because it takes half an hour, an hour and a half to actually absorb the marijuana from the cookie. And so what people are finding out is they have every intention to follow the rules, but an hour and a half later they've quadrupled the dose. And they're in a very bad danger zone of extreme excessive intoxication. And then finally, there are those things I talked about, the fake pot like spice and K2, that we really don't know yet about their effect, their safety, their toxicity. So, you know a lot more about marijuana, but I still want to tell you a little bit more. And that is, there's a whole new area that I was totally unaware of. I learned about it from my students, my young people that I treat. And these are extremely highly potent forms of marijuana. So I mentioned before, like if you used marijuana in the 60s, it was 1% THC. Nowadays, it's 10 to 20% THC. With the dab, it's a certain kind of distillation and a concentration. These are the street names, the oil, butter, shatter. And it induces a very intense, extreme high, and they're about 90% pure. Really scary stuff, and I'll give you an example of why it's so scary. So really scary stuff in a very short period of time. But it's only marijuana. That's the problem. Do you want to smoke? Do you want to get high? Are you getting high with the 1? Are you getting high with the 90? You're going to have a very different experience. And finally, or almost finally, what is marijuana? Well, there's a way to kind of legitimize or gentrify or make it feel really benign. You know, it used to be you always had to smoke and there was the smell that people would do. Now you can vape with marijuana. And for the most part, the usual smell that people are familiar with marijuana is removed, because with vaping, you're not combusting or burning marijuana. You end up vaporizing it. It's kind of like turning it into a gas. And I'm showing this because it looks kind of classy, what she's doing. However, it's using marijuana, again, with that 1 to 90%, and also because she's young, she's wiring her brain for an increased risk of marijuana addiction. So what does it do in our brain? I just spoke to a few people that I treat, and you know, people are saying things like, well, it's an outside plant that helps your brain slow down, and it does, you know, these kinds of things, but it's actually much more complicated. The molecule that's active in marijuana is called THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and it is what we call an imposter molecule, meaning that we already have a molecule in our brain that does the work. It's called anandamide, okay? Anandamide is related to THC, but instead of being like a jackhammer to your brain, anandamide is what we call a cannabinoid that will very gently, slowly release biological amounts, appropriate amounts to activate our cannabinoid receptors, okay? So we have a system in place for binding cannabinoids. Natural anandamide is our natural neurotransmitter. When we use THC, it pushes our natural chemical away and it binds to our cannabinoid receptors, activates those receptors orders of magnitude greater than they were ever meant to be activated. Now, this isn't new. Let me give you an example. This may sound confusing, so think about it this way. Does everyone know what endorphins are? Endorphins are our natural chemicals that make us feel good when we run or we hug somebody. Those endorphins are natural chemicals in tiny drops that activate our brain to feel good. Okay? The imposter molecule for endorphins are things like opium, oxycodone, fentanyl. We have an internal system, but it's taken over by an external imposter, and it activates our receptors, our brains, order of magnitude greater than they ever were meant to be. This is what drugs typically do. They kind of hijack our brains. So the THC from the outside, our internal anandamide, dial down our activity, slow things down, except the THC is a much stronger and longer effect than our natural neurotransmitter. And the THC has been shown to interfere in cell function in a way that our natural chemicals do not. And it interferes right here. If this is a brain cell, the top are the dendrites. That green thing is a brain cell. The top is all the ways we can communicate to other parts of our brain. There are billions of these in our brain. And the more of those arms or dendrites we have, the more we can communicate, the smarter we are, the faster we are. Down here at the bottom is where that neuron or brain cell is communicating with another cell also. And the neurotransmitters, the endorphins, the anandamide naturally flow across. They don't get to do that when we take other drugs because they take over. And over time, if we use drugs long term, we lose our dendrites. So we lose some of our ability to talk to other cells with chronic substance use. Where does that happen? When you use marijuana. Well, this, if you can see the yellow dots, those are the sites where marijuana or THC binds to our brain. Okay? There's some really good news in this picture, which is if you look right down here, okay, the brain stem, the little thing down there that looks like a stem, that's our brain stem. That's the part of the brain that keeps us awake and alive. That's the part that allows us to breathe, but we're not thinking about breathing. Okay, it allows us to regulate heart rate so we don't have to think about it. We know we're suffering with an epidemic of opioid overdoses. Opioids bind to the brainstem, and the more opioids people take, the less that functions, and that's how people die. They stop breathing, they stop using their heart rate to function. That's an opiate overdose. Gratefully, thankfully, THC doesn't bind there, but it does bind to some important places. Okay, number one for a growing mind is memory. Okay, it's been shown that if you use THC regularly, memory goes down. Your ability to store new information, retrieve information is diminished. And if you're thinking about smoking marijuana, driving your car, then we got to think about other things like your coordination is diminished, your movement, your ability to coordinate and move quickly, and also your judgment. Like, not a good idea to drive and use substances. If you're using, it becomes an okay idea. So you can see the direct effects of substances on the various components of the brain. Another part about marijuana, actually all substances, is they share something in common. They do something to our brains that feel rewarding or good, all right? If you felt terribly depressed or had panic attacks nonstop when you use a substance, you'd never use it again. But all substances increase dopamine in our brain. It's a very primitive structure that makes dopamine. And the thing about dopamine is it feels good if you have a great meal, you win a game, you see your family, you give them big hugs, you smoke marijuana, you use heroin, you drink a lot of alcohol. The brain doesn't know any better. It just releases dopamine for all those activities. Some of those activities release more dopamine. So using drugs, unfortunately, gives you a bigger dopamine boost than winning a game or hugging your parents or pretty much anything. It's an unnatural amount of dopamine. It's unsustainable. It wears out your dopamine, and after that burst is gone, you often will feel more depressed because you are now lacking dopamine. And then you're at risk for wanting to use again because you build up dopamine and you start that downward spiral. So you have a decision to make in, like, where do I get my dopamine? You know, and that's part of the discussion here today. This is just showing you, this is a brain, this is the front of the brain, the back of the brain. All drugs of abuse activate that reward system, but we are really able to do it beautifully without any drugs. I mean, that's what we are meant to do. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, look, you know, I have a great childhood or great parents or great school. I haven't really gotten into drugs too much or hasn't been much of an issue, and my brain is pretty good. So now I'm a teenager. I want to experiment. The problem is, like I told you, we used to think that brain development stopped at 11. We now know it stops at 25. And if you look at this picture, teenage years are peak periods of brain development. And when we engage in activities again and again, we create neural networks that wire our behaviors for life, which means the earlier you engage in a behavior, the more likely you're going to do it, for better or worse. Like, if you start speaking a language when you're 10 or 11, you're going to be much better than like someone like me who has to kind of create a rusty network to try to learn that language. Same thing with addiction. If I start using when I'm 10 or 12, it's going to be much harder for me to stop, to remove that, than someone who experiments in their 20s or 30s. So it's really a time of opportunity and vulnerability when you're a young person, which is cool because you get to choose, am I going to take this path or that path? Because your brain is elastic. I'm not elastic anymore. I got to really work it to learn something new. You guys, as young people, like, the sky's the limit. The sky is the limit. This slide shows you on the bottom, on the x-axis, birth to 70, okay? The brain plasticity, or the ability to learn something or grow something, accomplish something, is at its height when you're birth to about 20. That's when you're growing your brain. And you can see the effort required goes way up as you get older. But are you going to build great sports ability, great academic ability, a great and terrible addiction? That's the question. Those are the decisions based on your brain. And it's true because we've studied this looking at young people, and we see, this is a graph looking at age of first use of marijuana, and then the percent of people who end up addicted to marijuana. We see that those people with those pliable brains who begin to engage in marijuana use early on, like let's say you start to experiment regularly at the age of 13, well, 17% of you are going to be addicted to marijuana because that plastic brain is going to get wired for addiction. If you delay it until your 20s, it's less than 8%. These are the decisions to make about how you want that brain to work. And a lot of times people will kind of poo-poo and minimize it. Again, everybody does it. It's not a big deal. It's not like heroin where people could overdose so they can't stop. Actually, what I see as a psychiatrist is it's not a big deal when you're in the 20s and 30s, you've moved on to other substances, but it's actually the #1 reason we admit kids for addiction. It's actually marijuana when they're really in their teen years. So it's a big deal at that age. So it is a problem. Not that anyone, as I said, overdoses. It's not as dangerous as other substances for the most part, but marijuana withdrawal happens. And this is what it looks like. I'm irritable, I'm angry, I can't sleep, I have nightmares, weight issues, I can't concentrate. The tricky thing is this is caused by the marijuana withdrawal, but then the person suffering from it feels like, if only I smoke, I could feel better. And it perpetuates the problem. So I want to talk about memory because there's a lot of confusion about memory and marijuana. Okay, we have these very cool things. They're called hippocampi. If you in biology you probably heard about them. That's where we store our memory, and they look like these little caterpillars with giant tails. Very closely related to what we call amygdala. The amygdala is our emotional memory. And then the hippocampus is the facts, the stuff. Oh, I got to remember from my grades, stuff like that. Vital to how we function. Now, question about the hippocampus, can you grow it? Can you make it smaller? Well, there have been studies that have shown if you want to have a really good memory, you have to engage in new activities. And you can't just be comfortable with what you know. For example, it's been shown that for new taxi drivers in England, once they learn their new route, they can increase the size of their hippocampus, their memory center of their brain, by 1/3. It's amazing. I mean, you really can get smarter and improve your memory dramatically. What about when you smoke marijuana and what happens to your memory? Well, it slows things down. That's what THC does in general. Specifically, it slows down your ability to remember, to recall, and it starts to snip away at those little synapses that I talked to you about, because it's slowed down, it's not as active. It's like if I didn't use my right arm all day and night, I'd end up with a wimpy arm, you know, like kind of a skinny little arm that doesn't function well. Same thing with your brain. If you don't use your memory well, or you're slowed down with THC, your hippocampus will get smaller. Okay. How does that manifest as far as like your grades or your ability to function or get a job? Okay, there was a big study coming out of New Zealand, that looked at that. They followed kids from early on, they were 12, 13, and they had not yet used marijuana. Okay, so they studied this whole cohort, about 1,000 people, followed them every 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, all the way up to 38 years. And they looked at a vast number of symptoms and behaviors, and this is what they found. That from 12 or 13 to 38, there was a relationship with marijuana and IQ. So if you were a non-user during that time, your IQ went up 1 point between 13 and 38. But when you began to be diagnosed on multiple occasions with a marijuana addiction, you lost IQ points. Okay? Your IQ went down. So diagnosed once, you lost 2. Diagnosed twice, you lost 3. You can see how it goes. But the biggest differential in loss of IQ points was this. If you were diagnosed, the gray area, on 3 separate occasions addicted to marijuana, but you were addicted before 18, before your brain was fully developed, that's when you lost 8 IQ points. There's something unique about a young person's brain, substance use, that is more damaging than an adult. You know, so like if this is something you're thinking about, wait till you're an adult, because it's much less damage to an adult brain. Not that I'm promoting that, but I'm promoting delay. And another thing to think about, okay, so if your brain is not optimal, how does that affect your job prospects? You know, you're getting a degree in college. This is a chart that shows that. Really important. At the bottom it says, did you ever smoke marijuana? No, never. Or I smoked 1 to 99 times. Next group is 100 to 99 times. And you can see how it goes on. So from never use to over 400 times when I was in high school, okay? And what you can see is the more that you actually smoke, the more likely, if we look at blue, the more likely that you will not be able to earn a bachelor's degree by the age of 25. So the more and more you smoke, the less and less you achieve in your academics. The more and more you smoke, the more likely you are to be unemployed. And then finally, the more you smoke, the more likely you will be welfare dependent. Now, I'm not saying that's the only factor, but there's a correlation to be aware of. And it's important to think of, like, what do I want to do in life? What are my priorities? You know, is it important that I get a bachelor's or that I'm employed? What's more important? And I deal with people who have struggled with this. They've gotten very addicted. Their marijuana is very important. They really want a job, but the two don't go together. And they have to make a decision. Am I going to keep smoking and go down that road, or am I going to stop so I can attain those things that really are my core values? The hope is that we prevent that from happening. So one thing I hear a lot is, okay, we know about marijuana, but I know it's safer than alcohol. Any thoughts about that? Is alcohol safer than marijuana? Any thoughts? I think there's water here, maybe not. No. Who thinks alcohol is safer than marijuana? Okay, some people think alcohol is safer. Who thinks marijuana is safer than alcohol? Okay, so the marijuana is safer than alcohol have won. Let's see this, let's look at the news, thank you. So if we look at I'm drinking, I'm driving, that quadruples, 4 times greater chance I'll be in a motor vehicle accident. If I'm smoking, just smoking, I only double my risk of a car crash. So in that situation, yeah, marijuana is safer. Difficulty is many people smoke and drink and then get behind the wheel. So that's important to be aware of. And to ask the question of it being safe because it's an herb, you're not going to overdose, that was kind of that ship has sailed because of what's going on now. And I'm going to use an example. There had never been a confirmed case of someone dying from marijuana. And now that's different because of those potency. And one victim was Levi Thamba, who was a student, a visiting student. He was from Wisconsin, I think, went to Colorado to go get high with his group of friends, and Colorado allowed for marijuana use. And he did that thing with the cookie that I talked about. He had a big cookie. He did not use marijuana a lot. He took a quarter, waited a half hour, nothing happened. Quarter, nothing happened. You know, within an hour and a half, he had the whole cookie, and nothing happened. And then suddenly Levi began to hear voices, because at high doses you can become psychotic or have hallucinations. Voices that the devil was there and the devil was after him in this apartment building he was in with his friends. He was agitated, he was anxious, his friend tried to calm him down. He got quiet for a little bit, and then he proceeded to run to the window and jumped out and died. So obviously the marijuana did not cause an overdose. What it caused was a psychotic event, which is happening more and more with young people who are taking these very high doses of marijuana. And there have been many people since then who have died because of the acute psychosis related to ingesting high doses of marijuana. It's a different playing field. Like we didn't know anything about this until we started to see this. So that's kind of the background information, the facts that I'd like to present. I do want to say, as far as alcohol or marijuana, marijuana is perceived to be a safer substance. It has fewer effects on the body than alcohol, but the message that we want to convey is we would like you to not use anything. But to answer that question that I put up. So how do we talk about this? I mean, just by having you guys here today and hopefully listening and thinking about this without judgment is a really good opportunity to start the conversation. Because I have to say, the conversation is not like you leave here, you have the talk, you're done. The conversation is for the rest of your life as parents, with kids, with your teacher, with your clergy. It's kind of like the sex conversation. Like, you don't have it once when your child is 13, 14, just say, whew, done. Because they're gonna have questions, they're gonna have new experiences, opportunities, adversity. Our job, I mean, I feel like my job as a parent is to have that ongoing conversation with my child. So some ground rules. I love my kids, adore my kids, but I can't be their friend. I have to be a parent. And fortunately, my spouse agrees. And my spouse needs to be saying what I'm saying. And if it's not a spouse, a significant other, a grandma, a grandpa, a teacher, we can build our own families. So the message we provide is consistent and specific. And one thing that I really try to avoid is you always, you never, you should. It's a lot of this stuff. And so anytime I engage in this conversation, I try to keep my finger down and think more like a hug. That seems to help me. But once we get into this, if I go like that to you, how are you feeling about me? I think you're just going to go like this or fight back, and not much gets accomplished. Like this guy. Now, if you were talking to this guy and he was doing this, what would you be up to? How would you respond? I mean, it doesn't have to be about kids. I mean, what if you went to work on Monday and your boss is like that? What do? I'd be like this, I'm not a fighter. I'd just be like, okay, yes, whatever you want. Some of you might be fighters and you do it differently. But if we're like this as parents, as teachers, I think we've already lost. So we have to really work on that. Other communication pitfalls. Threats don't work. Shaming doesn't work. And avoid does not work. Like, if you don't talk to your kids about it, who is? And what are they going to say to your kids? Probably not what you would be saying. So we can't avoid. And the earlier you start talking, the better. You can start really early. And it doesn't have to be about drugs, but it could be like when you give your child that little dose of Tylenol for a fever and you say, I'm giving you medicine now. Medicine is for when you're sick. And it's always important to take it only when you're sick and with an adult, because some people have had problems taking medicine the wrong way. You're talking about drugs. You got it going. So you can start early in many ways. Kids learn early that these substances exist. What about preschool? Well, you know, kids follow us. We're still role models. You haven't learned about all of our flaws and all of what you don't like about us, but they copy us. And so if you have a substance use problem as an adult, it's a really good time to get help for your substance use problem. Driving up here, I was listening to a tape. I always listen to tapes about addiction, and the person said that 1 out of 4 American adults will have some form of a substance use disorder during their lifetime, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's alcohol or other substances. So it's a really common problem. Just like the pill to the young child, look for teachable moments and encourage healthy choices and behaviors. Talk about brain health. Learn about development like we're talking about today, and wiring for life, and encourage healthy choices. What about when they're older? Well, sometimes this group still look to us for answers, sometimes not. Some still think we're experts, sometimes not. Again, you don't want to be pointing the finger, you want to be doing the hug thing. So more factual, not fear. And this is the age your child is a scientist. You want to talk about the science. And if you don't know it, it's so easy to go online. There's NIDA, there's SAMHSA. I can talk to anyone interested about these sites, but coming here today is wonderful. Another thing that's really important when they're 8 to 12, don't wait till they're teenagers. Refusal skills. Actually acting out with your child. You know, there will be people offering you substances or wanting to drink with you. What is the talk you're going to do to avoid that? And part of this too is letting your child know, I'm here for you no matter what, and if you're in a tight spot, call me up, I will pick you up, I'm not going to do this. We'll talk about it in a neutral way at some point, but no matter what, I'm here for you, I have your back. And helping them to navigate this time, because this is when it starts. So what about teenagers? It gets kind of spicy then. They know others who use, I can guarantee that. They have opportunities to use, and they may be using. That's just the facts, that's the way it is. So that's what we deal with as families. So again, we want to focus on this area, the health, growing your best, healthy, smartest, capable brain, and to avoid things that will impair that growth. Being safe, driving safe, being legal, knowing the laws. It's important to know their friends and families, because some parents, I work with some families that, that what they do together is they smoke marijuana all the time. I once had a young man come in. The mom came in with a son who was like 16, and she said, he's using opiate pills, he's using OxyContin. You got to get him off. I'm terrified. People are dying. So I worked with him for about 2 months. He stopped using. He did really well. Mom came in, and I said, he's doing great. He did this, and this. The only thing is he tested positive for marijuana the whole time, and he really didn't want to address it. And the mom said to me, well, I came here for you to help him with his opiates. I don't want him to stop smoking marijuana. What do you think my family's going to do after dinner? Like, don't touch that. So a lot of families, I keep learning and I'm humbled, a lot of families do use together, but if you're the teacher of your child, what are you teaching them? The other part of working with teens is avoid that vacuum, keep them busy, engaged. Kids may complain that they have to take out the garbage or feed the dog. They need routines, their brain needs it, and that's a much better routine than a substance routine. And lavish them with reward and praise when they do something good, which is much more powerful than that stuff. So this is, again, just a reminder that parents sometimes have substance problems. It's a genetic disease, it's environmental. I would just encourage any family struggling with this to get help. It's like the best time to do it. We have wonderful options, and I see this a lot. As a mom will say to me, I am such a good mom. I can play with the kids for hours. I read, I do Play-Doh for 4 hours as long as I've smoked marijuana that morning, or as long as I took my oxys. Now, see that a lot, and it really bugs me because when you're high, you are the worst judge of your functionality. And that's something really important. I once had the mom with the OxyContin, I'm the best mom, and I do this. I brought the family in, and the family said, well, we call her Mommy Half-Mast. I said, why is that? Well, she's at the dinner table like this. That's called nodding out because you're high on opiates. Doing this all the time. And we talked about how she thought she was a great mom, but she really wasn't because she was high. So that's important to take a serious look at that. So we had the unhappy dad, here's the unhappy girl. Questions, your child may say like, Mom, Dad, you did it, why can't I? Well, we didn't know stuff back then that we know now. I mean, way back when I smoked cigarettes when I was a teenager. There's no way I would do that now knowing about cancer and all the complications. But back then we didn't know. We didn't think about brains. Or, yeah, I used back then and look at how it affected me. Look at the consequences. This is a good topic to talk about. And just because I made those mistakes doesn't mean I wish mistakes for you. Well, we already went over this, the response to, but it's natural. We know that, to have some yeast poop, right? It's legal. How do people feel about it being legal? Any thoughts? So some people, I think there are a lot of strong emotions about it. And it will be legal, I assume, in your state, and you'll deal with it. And that's a great opportunity to have another discussion about this, ongoing discussions about marijuana, which, with alcohol, it's been shown that the density of liquor stores in a community reflects the density of alcoholism in that community. So if you have a lot of marijuana shops in your community, it may reflect the density of marijuana addiction in your community. But I have to say there's a lot we just don't know. And then here's your daughter saying, well, look, if you don't want me smoking, you want me to drink? That's more harmful. Well, I'd rather you not do either because I want that brain to be really healthy and functional. And you know what? Down the road, when it's legal, you're going to make your own decisions. Right now, I'm asking you not to do that because it's harmful to you. Now, some parents do this. Well, look, I get what you're saying, Dr. Michaels, but if I have a party and my kids, they're great kids, they're all A students and they're in the barn, and I supply the alcohol and I do whatever the kids have, the marijuana, I don't let them leave. Is that legal? What do you guys think? It's actually against the law and it's a liability. You could be sued for any injuries, even just supplying it, even just allowing it. It's called the social host laws. So that's important to be aware of. So, and in thinking about your family, your structure, your schedule, it's important to identify high-risk times. Anyone know the riskiest time for your child with substances? Don't be shy. What are the riskiest times? You got it. Every day is the riskiest time. After school until dinner time. When if you're like me, both parents work, it's like 3 to 6. That is a risky time. It's not the once a month party, which could be risky. So we got to fill in those times with good, fun, challenging, stoking the brain in a healthy way, bunch of activities. Just a reminder to avoid the scare tactics. And I saw some people shaking their head when I said, call me no matter what. That's called a pick-up contract. And some schools actually formalize it. I agree that I will pick you up wherever, whenever, 3 in the morning, county away, blah, 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 because it's more important to know that you're alive and you're safe and you're not alone. And the next day we'll talk about it. I will do it in a way that is not threatening or menacing to problem solve. Now you can't read all this, but this is from the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. And if you're interested and you want to learn more about how to talk to your family, this is a nice little list. I'll just go over a few. Like, I disapprove of you hanging out with that group of friends. I disapprove, kind of a judgment, instead of I'm concerned about your group of friends and I'm worried they may not be the best influence. Little tweaks of how you convey information. Smoking pot is a stupid choice. I would like to go like this. No, it's not about stupidity. Smoking is unhealthy, and that's why I'm concerned. Just one more. I'm disappointed in you for breaking curfew. I'm worried about your decision to come home past curfew. These are not big shifts, but they convey something very significant. It's like that embrace. I'm here for you. I'm worried. I love you. Not that we want our kids to just, kind of be in the closet, no fun, no new experiences, because in reality, you guys are wired to have new experience. You are wired right now to go out and try new things. But there are a ton of, not that I would let my boys do this, there are tons of things to do, not that and then like ratcheting down. But even if you look at this group of Amish kids, they somehow created, I don't know if you can see this, a seesaw that flings you out into the world. So we get it. We get it. Like, you guys should be having fun. You guys should be trying new things. You should be wiring your brain for good, fun challenges, experience some adversity. But let's try to figure out those things that don't involve substances which are harmful to your brains. So let's aim for those joyful options. I just put an example like exercise. You fire up your brain, you literally fire up your brain. The brain on the right after a 20, you guys don't walk though, you're like marathoners. 20-minute walk, you have fired up, reddened up your brain in the best way, that possible. Walking, running, yoga, sports, you name it. Because in summary, we all want to help you to grow the happiest, healthiest brain for life. And we'll end there.
I think
You want me to turn that off?
Either way.
Okay, hold on. Do that. Perfect. Okay.
My name is Chrissy Blaylock. I'm the Refuse to Use coordinator. I just want to say thank you, Dr. Michaels. That was wonderful. And for everybody coming out today, I really appreciate it. You being here says a lot about the work that we do, and what it is for you to be here is so important, and to continue the message and the dialogue at home. Before we move on to the pledge, just a couple housekeeping things. Signing up does not mean you are officially registered for the program. You need to go online to our website that is up right now and find the Refuse to Use registration link to whether you want to have a Stratton Mountain Pass, a Viking Nordic Center, or Riley Rink, or if you're here to enjoy the information throughout the season without a pass. And as a reminder, the Dorset Theater Festival, when you complete the program successfully, you receive a summer pass to their productions. So to remind you all that the work that you do, the time that you put into this program is also rewarded during the summer. The calendar is also online. Make sure you stay in touch with your reps, the individuals that you saw at the tables today. Those are who you should be communicating with first when it comes to registration things. I am an email or a phone call away. If I'm missing anything, I can't recall, but before as I ask Paul Bremel to come up and do the pledge, just to let everybody know, if you haven't already found your parent carrying adult, please go ahead and stand up with them. The formation of how we're going to be doing it today is that Paul will be saying it, and then please repeat I will, or whatever he has requested. You want to go ahead and stand up? Thank you.
So we can have our parents or our caring adults face the students that you're here for. As you say the words or agree to the words of the pledge, remember that, as Dr. Michaels indicated, you are their role model, and so the words that you speak need to ring true to them as well as you. So parents, this is for you. Will you support your student in their choice to be and remain substance-free? Please state, I will. Will you notify the school representative or the collaborative if your student is unable to honor their pledge and uses alcohol, tobacco, or other drugs and therefore violates their pledge? You know that this will mean termination of your student's pass and that you will be provided resource referrals. Please state, I will. Will you provide or assist with your students' transportation to the scheduled substance abuse prevention education events? Please state, I will. Will you support your student by attending the kickoff event and dialogue night in January? Please state, I will. In the event of a family scheduling conflict, will you notify the refuse to use representative at your student's school and attempt to make alternate arrangements? Please state, I will. Okay, students, it's your turn.
Student pledge. Will you refuse to use alcohol, tobacco, and any other drugs? Will you not misuse any over-the-counter or prescription drugs such as diet pills or cold medicine? Please state, I will. Will you support your friends in their choice to refuse to use alcohol, tobacco, and any other drugs? Please state, I will. Will you behave respectfully and responsibly at RTU events and while using your pass? Please state, I will. Will you not make any claims of illegal substance use in any printed material, public speech, and/or internet site, such as Facebook or Snapchat? Please state, I will. Will you attend at least 5 of the scheduled substance use prevention education programs sponsored by your school? Please state, I will. By joining the RTU program, do you understand that you voluntarily give your word that you will honor this pledge and you will follow the guidelines? Please state, I do. You understand you cannot uphold this pledge, then your pass will be terminated. Please state, I do.
Thank you.
All right, so thanks to Dr. Michaels, and to reiterate, it's great to talk about these issues with your students. We provided you with a bag of resources. We have a great website of resources, and with Dr. Michaels' presentations, there's a lot to talk about. Go and enjoy your day. Thanks.
Right. And there's a problem with that, and you probably have heard some of the stories, which is that if you buy one of those amazingly good-looking cookies, right, it will say, eat 1/4 of the cookie. That's like the standard dose. All right? Now, if you're like me, I've never in my life had 1/4 of a cookie. Okay? So that's a problem. But even if I followed the rules and I took 1/4 and I consumed it and I weigh it, I'm like, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. What are you going to do? I'm going to eat the other 1/4. Nothing's happening. Nothing. Okay. By the end, I've eaten the whole cookie because nothing happened. Because it takes half an hour, an hour and a half to actually absorb the marijuana from the cookie. And so what people are finding out is they have every intention to follow the rules, but an hour and a half later, they've quadrupled the dose, and they're in a very bad danger zone of extreme excessive intoxication.